Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Grand Prairie City Council meeting. This is our second session of the day. We will move out of our recess and into item number 13, public hearings. I would call to order the public hearing for Bylaw C 1260-109, amendment to the land use bylaw. I would look to administration for an introduction. Ms. Downing.
Thank you, Mayor Given. Administration has received an application to amend the land use bylaw in order to redesignate 24.4 hectares of land from arterial commercial and general commercial to urban reserve. The subject properties are located in the Trader Ridge Outline Plan area, north of 132nd Avenue and west of 100th Street. The Trader Ridge Outline Plan was adopted in October 2014. The entire plan area was rezoned from urban reserve to arterial commercial and general commercial at that time. The majority of the plan area was subdivided in 2016 and then subsequently serviced, with the majority of the work being completed in 2017. This included construction of a storm pond, water, sewer, and storm infrastructure, street lights, paved roads and sidewalks, trails, and landscaping. Improvements adjacent to the development included upgrades to 132nd Avenue, traffic signals, turn bays, and storm sewer, which were fully funded by the transportation off-site levies, and improvements at the intersection of 100th Street and 139th Avenue, which were shared between the developer and the city tax base. When the land was serviced, the farming activities ceased, and the CA and CG zones do not allow those agricultural uses to resume. The applicant is applying to rezone 7 vacant lots in order to farm the land. If successful with the rezoning amendment, the applicant would need to consolidate the lots and receive development permits for agricultural activities prior to farming. So now the analysis of planning's recommendation. The land is serviced and ready for commercial development. The roads have been constructed, sidewalks, streetlights, utilities installed to property lines. Rezoning and subsequent consolidation of properties would have an impact on the development potential. When there is development interest in these properties, the landowner would need to apply to rezone them back to CA and CG and re-subdivide. This could cause delays or lead to missed opportunities for new development. One of the key purposes of zoning is to separate incompatible land uses. The subject properties are within a commercially zoned subdivision. Adjacent properties within Trader Ridge are zoned general commercial, which permit a range of activities including motor vehicle dealerships, hotels, restaurants, and retail uses. Modern agriculture is a complex activity that creates noise, odor, dust, spraying of chemicals, and the presence of slow-moving machinery on the roads. The land use bylaw. From a planning perspective, the current land use districts, CA and CG, are the most appropriate districts for this area and the long-range plans for the city, as per the adopted area structure plan and outline plan. In addition, these uses contribute to the city's growth objectives to increase the supply of commercial land. There is no legitimate planning rationale to downzone these properties. The purpose of the Urban Reserve District is to protect large tracts of land from premature subdivision and development. This district is typically applied to rural land immediately after annexation, thereby preventing scattered or piecemeal development. UR districting allows continued farming until detailed planning is done and land is ready for subdivision and development. If this rezoning is approved, Engineering Services recommends that the road servicing the area be closed to the public and streetlights de-energized to mitigate the unnecessary cost to the city. The parcels that are subject to the application generate $336,952 in municipal taxes in 2019. If rezoning is approved and the subject properties are successful in qualifying for the farmland assessment, it is expected the municipal taxes would be between $15,000 and $50,000. This reduction would need to be covered from the general tax levy and would impact future budgets. Advertising the public hearing, including 2 ads in the Daily Herald Tribune, information posted on the city's website, signs on the property, and letters mailed to the adjacent property owners. No formal correspondence was received in response to these notifications. The applicant is requesting an amendment to the land use bylaw to rezone the subject area from commercial arterial and commercial general to urban reserve. The proposed amendment is not consistent with the city's long-term planning, is incompatible with adjacent land uses in the neighborhood, and does not meet Council's vision for the Trader Ridge neighborhood as a thriving commercial node in the north end of the city. For these reasons, administration recommends that Council defeat Bylaw C-1260-109 at second reading.
Okay, thanks very much, Ms. Downing. Are there any questions for administration before we move to the presentation submission portion of the agenda? If there aren't, Council will have another opportunity. If there are questions of a technical matter, we can ask administration. But at this time, I would open the presentation submission portion of our public hearing and would look to see if there's anyone to speak in support of the application, the applicant, or anyone else that wishes to come forward. And if we need to pull up an extra chair, if we could, somebody from our management team pull forward another one there. Thank you. Gentlemen, if you'd care to introduce yourselves as you take your seats, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Given, Council. I'm Scott Rossler with Helix Engineering. I have with me today Jeff McCammon with Cushman Wakefield, and Sam Osman is the developer of Trader Properties and the Trader Ridge development. So I've been here before doing this exact amendment and modification. So I'll just give you guys a little bit of background on this one. Is actually, I would say, significantly, it's somewhat different from the perspective of land uses and how we've gotten to where we are. But because we were here previously, we did discuss with planning as to how to potentially go down this road without kind of disrupting the system, I guess, if you want to say it that way. We do recognize that putting this land back to UR creates a situation where we're ultimately in the future going to have to rezone it back to CA again. So we did have a discussion around the possibility of, with planning again, the possibility of creating land use definitions within the land use bylaw that would allow us to do this within CA and industrial districts and whatnot. Planning was of the opinion that this was probably not feasible at this time and wanted to proceed under this direction. So knowing that this had come before council before and it was a viable alternative, it does produce a fair amount of cost to my client, to be honest. In the future, he's got to pay for land use amendments and whatnot with city fees and fees to planning to complete that. So it's not taken lightly. It's definitely something that when we look at it, there's going to be some costs in the future. So the reasons that we're here and the reasons we're asking for this amendment, first off is basically we want to farm. This land has a few issues with it. One of them being weeds, and so we get several weed notices every year from the city of Grande Prairie. The last quote we got to spray the vacant land that's under designation tonight was between $7,000 and $12,000 to spray the entire parcel. So we have to do that roughly 3 times per year. So we're looking at like $40,000 a year just in maintenance to maintain this parcel to the city of Grande Prairie's satisfaction. So farming is a very good way to control weeds without spraying. And I'll come back to kind of some of the comments that planning had made earlier later on in the presentation. We did have a delay in land use, and so under the MGA, if a permitted land use stops, an unpermitted land use stops for more than 6 months, you can't resume the use again. So basically, once we rezoned it to CA with a 6-month delay in the farming operations, we can no longer go back to farming. The intention was always to go back to farming, but this is a very, very large project. So, as most of you know, the timelines to complete a project like this are, I think we were in the range of 3 years with all the construction. We're actually still not done. So, and this started in 2008. So we're well along the road. It's been a lot happening in that time. So weed control is one of the reasons. The second reason is the economy. We actually just are in a situation where when we started this, the economy was quite strong, quite hot. My client was under the impression and was very optimistic about Grande Prairie, and it looked very, very good for the economy at that time. We ended up, by the time we were completed, economy had tapered off a little bit, and we were in a situation where the interior lands, which is what we're trying to rezone today, are not moving right now. So we're looking at several years worth of land supply here. If you will notice, we are not trying to rezone the lands that are adjacent to 132nd Ave or 100th Street. There are very good reasons for that. We think that that land will move fairly quickly. It has been moving relatively quickly, not to the speed that we would like, but it is active. So we're trying to avoid that. And then also, I mean, as planning mentioned, the tax burden on this vacant land is quite significant. We're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars per year, and that is a significant undertaking for land that's sitting vacant. We do have a tendency when we come to these hearings specifically on this, it was the focus on the last one as well, is that the taxes come up as, you know, this is something that the city of Grande Prairie is entitled to, and and that's where we're at, and this is lost revenue. I'm going to run through the timelines of what this project has brought, and I would suggest that it's not necessarily lost revenue, but there's actually an increase in revenue from what this developer has brought to the city. So I would like us to focus on the actual history and the deliverables and what the development has brought to the city of Grande Prairie versus what they're taking away right now. And so to start that, again, 2008 was when this land was purchased. At that time, there was the taxation was based on farmland. It was for all intents and purposes zero. It would probably not go back to that. I'm guessing it was significantly less than $15,000 per year. There was no development on this parcel land, and there was none proposed. We represented the landowner at the time. They had zero intentions of developing. As a matter of fact, they were planning on handing the property down to their children, and it was intended to sit there for a significant amount of years. At that time, Mr. Osmond came along, purchased the property for a fairly healthy sum of money. They then engaged the city of Grande Prairie and most of the representatives to try to determine what was best for this location. So it literally started with a 20-acre parcel in the southeast corner. They bought that with consultation with the city of Grande Prairie and a lot of the economic development, engineering, planning. Another 10 acres adjacent to it was purchased. That was Grande equipment, and then following that and subsequent to that, the remainder of the quarter section was purchased as well. So through this, all 160 acres of land was picked up by Trader Properties for development. In all the meetings that we had early on, we included economic development, we included council, we included the mayor's office, we engaged Cushman Wakefield, who's an international realtor, to try to market this property. We heard the directions and the desires of the city. We came forward with a development proposal, and we engaged planning essentially for this property as per the messaging that we got from the city of Grande Prairie. So what was that messaging? The messaging that we got at that time was we need to be reactive to the market. So have shovel-ready land, have a variety of land that's available, have multiple zonings, have multiple sized parcels. Be ready when a business comes to Grande Prairie, because we wanted to be reactive to anyone that wanted to develop business in the city. So we did that. We feel like we created a market-ready product. Trader listened to that message. We developed, for all intents and purposes, exactly that. So currently out there is 140 acres of fully developed land. It's fully serviced. There are lots of various sizes ranging from, I think the smallest now is around an acre, and they range up to about 30 acres. So we literally could take pretty much any size of parcel that someone wants, and we've modified those, I think, 4 or 5 times since then to react to the market. So we've done major improvements to 132nd Ave, so the twinning on 132nd between 100th Street and 108th Street was as a result of this development. We've done major improvements to 100th Street from 132nd Avenue North to 140th. That was all done as part of this development. The traffic signals at 102nd Street and 132nd Ave were done as part of this development, and also the traffic signals at 100th Street and 139th Ave. So there's been millions of dollars invested by my client in this development. Through that, it was not a simple process. We had multiple discussions with, because this is on the city boundary, we had a lot of discussions with the county of Grande Prairie because it borders their lands as well. And through that and through the accesses that were closed and whatnot, we also had Alberta Transportation involved. Being that we were closing an access to a highway, we did have a discussion around that. We have a temporary access that was constructed last year, not 2019, but 2018, as part of this development, which was somewhat of a condition laid out by the county and Alberta Transportation. So approximately $40,000 access that was constructed that was recently barricaded off by the city of Grande Prairie due to an unwillingness to maintain the road. So we understand that, and that's kind of where we're at. So since we've been working on this project, again, Mr. McCammon and his firm have been working very hard. So they've brought a lot of businesses to Grande Prairie through this development. So the businesses that exist in Trader, I'm just going to run through them right now, give you an idea of who's coming. This is all brand new assessment to the city of Grande Prairie. So we've got the driving force behind this development was the Windsor Ford. So that's the largest Ford dealership in Canada. Mr. Osmond can probably tell you the area, but it's a very, very large facility, state-of-the-art type of a thing. Cushman then also brought to the table a Co-op food store. So Co-op Foods have rejigged their marketing and the way they want to operate, and we now have a food store in the north end of Grande Prairie. Coming with them was a gas bar and car wash. We also have a Co-op liquor store in that location. There is an acupuncture clinic that will be constructed here within likely the next year. That sale closed recently. Petro-Canada has purchased a 5 acre lot in the northeast corner of the development. They will be constructing shortly as well. And Mr. Osmond himself is doing 4 5-unit CRU buildings that are currently under construction in the southeast corner of the building, of the property. So there's multiple other deals that are underway right now that I can't talk about. But my point, I guess, is there's a lot of assessment that has come in the door because of this parcel land and this development. So currently, I'm estimating in excess of $60 million worth of assessment that's come in. We expect significantly more within the next couple of years, as there's a bunch of properties under construction currently. So the transition from 2008 was we had no development and no assessment. Now we have a fully developed 140 acres. We're able to react to market. We have major investment into the city of Grande Prairie, into the road networks, and into the available land. We have $60 million plus of assessment, bringing in approximately a couple $1 million a year in taxes. The cost to the city through this process was a portion of the traffic and signals and improvements at 100th Street and 139th Avenue. So in the range of $450,000. So every year, the taxes for this land bring in 4 times the city's investment. So I'm going to let Mr. Osmond or Mr. McCammon talk a little bit about the history, and then I'll kind of summarize everything at the end.
I'll go first. So as I mentioned, Jeff McCammon with Cushman & Wakefield. I'm going to just go back a little further. My history with the property is we do all the business for Husky Oil across Canada. They had a 20-acre chunk here in Grande Prairie that they deemed surplus. They did have a operator in Claremont that precluded them from building their truck stop, which they originally bought the land for. So in our marketing of it, we brought Sam to Grande Prairie and worked with Brian and people within your economic development. And it came very apparent that when Mr. Osmond bought the 20 acres originally, that we needed to look at the 10 next door, specifically because of your 132nd Ave feasibility study was going on, and we were kind of encouraged to go that direction, which we did. So in the spirit of fairness and equality and collaboration, Mr. Osmond spent considerable time learning how the land next door would be for sale with Grande Equipment, and we were eventually successful with that. The next, I'm going to just drag on a little bit here, but the Pat Garrett family and partners that own the 122 acres originally told us day one, this land is never for sale. And we spent a bit of time with him. He gave me a great tour of the city, and it was very apparent he loved Grande Prairie. He grew up here, has a passion for it, felt this was the best piece of land in all of Grande Prairie, and it would be an absolute shame for it to go to 2 car dealerships, which is what we had to put on the 20 acres and the 10 acres with Grand Equipment. We told him if he sold it to us, we would use our best efforts to bring in a grocery store. So we collaborated with the landowners, not only Grand Equipment, but also the people that didn't want to sell this land but believe in your city that wanted to see this. We did bring in co-op. We did bring in services to the people that live in this part of the city. And especially we collaborated with the city of Grande Prairie. And we went through a process that amazes me, the patience that Mr. Osmond had. He's holding now millions of dollars of land that don't come at no cost to hold. And the city of Grande Prairie and the county of Grande Prairie had their own issues that stem from transportation and how people felt this site needed to be developed. And patiently, Mr. Osmond sat back while we brought him deals. We brought him Windsor Forward. We brought him a couple deals on the interior land early on when the economy was good. We weren't able to perform on those deals because he couldn't get his approvals from the city, because we couldn't have an agreement between the county and the city on how we could actually get forward on the development. We lost those deals. Those deals aren't to be had today. We have not been successful bringing in deals at the assessed value for these interior pieces. The activity has been strictly on 100th as well as on 132nd Avenue. We're committed to doing everything we can to develop those pieces, but these interior pieces have just proven difficult in the current economy. Back when we started this process and we gave the city and the county as much time as they needed, we had a market for these pieces. Today we don't. And if we could create the market, we would. If the city's interested in buying them at their assessed values, we would happily sell them. I think I could make that. I think that comment's pretty fair. So, in the spirit of fairness and collaboration and equality, we are here today just asking for it to go back to an ag use for these interior pieces. We're going to put the pedal to the metal on the pieces that have a value today. As Scott alluded to, we are going full forward with the shops at Trader Ridge. Sam did something else unique that a developer typically wouldn't do, is he shared his asset. We did sell a 1 acre piece to GP Acupuncture, and I can tell you in my 31 years in commercial real estate, I've never seen a developer that took that type of response from a local business that wanted to be there and had to be on the frontage. And again, in that spirit of collaboration and being fair and equal, Sam sold Dr. Sue the piece of land for his business, which is currently under construction. So I think there's a case study here for behavior, and there's also a case study here for economics, I think, for everybody to win by letting us go back to an ag use for these. And to that point, I'm going to pass it on to Sam if there's more you want to add, please.
I think Scott and Jeff were very articulate in representing our position. Not much I need to add, other than we still want to cooperate with the city and make it a win-win for all of us. That's it. Thank you.
I'll maybe just touch on a couple of the concerns that planning had. Rezoning, I just make some quick notes, so if I mess this up, hopefully Ms. Downing will correct me. They were concerned that rezoning was going to cause delays in development. We do recognize that. By doing this rezoning process and having to come back to rezone to CA, we can't be as reactive to the market as what we would have liked. However, that was the kind of direction that was set out in front of us. So we, knowing that we're probably not going to sell any of this land for multiple years, I think Mr. Osmond's willing to take that risk. We will be as reactive as we can, and we've had pretty good response, to be honest, from administration.
We should also just mention the fact that we developed the entire piece at the city's, city suggested that was the best way to proceed with the entirety of Trader Ridge instead of phasing it ourselves because of these conversations. So just, sorry, I thought I'd throw that in there.
No, that's fair. So we think we can be fairly reactive. We've had a lot of buy-in from administration when it does come to things like that. So I'm not overly concerned. It's still a 3 to 4 month process for us to get, from someone knocking on our door saying, hey, I want that parcel of land, to actually being able to sell it to them at this point. Because it's got to be all subject to them being able to actually construct what they want. So one of the other concerns that came up was farming and the use of chemicals, dust, etc. I highly doubt that farming on this property is going to be more chemicals than spraying Roundup on it 3 times a year. To be honest, growing a crop is probably the best weed control we can have out there. There would be chemicals either way, so not too concerned about that. Farming nowadays, dust is not nearly as much of an issue. Most things now are no zero till, so not too concerned. We do have, I understood from the presentation there's a possibility they close the road. At that point, it's the city's road. They can do what they want. We have in the past couple of years had to actually call maintenance in order to get access to some of the construction sites. So the city wasn't clearing these roads until some phone calls were made. So it's a little unfortunate. We got businesses that are trying to construct properties and are unable to get to their lands to get their construction crews in. So why, again, back to this, first off, we're really trying to control weeds. I think of myself, I've received probably 4 or 5 weed notices to our office that get forwarded on to Sam. This is a solution to that. And it's not a small cost. We're talking $40,000 a year to maintain, for the next, inevitably, to maintain the weed control out there. So farming will be basically a nil cost to us. So the economy, we do anticipate delayed development on these parcels, and taxation. The current assessment, to be quite honest, from our side, seems unreasonable. It isn't something that, for the amount of input costs, that seems like something that would be viable for a developer to carry. I know what Mr. Osmond's tax bill was this year, and it is significant. Let's just say that when you start hitting the 7-figure mark on taxes, it gets to be quite onerous to carry that for more than very short periods of time. This has been done before. As I said, I've been here before, and we went through this, basically the same debate. Council supported it, and obviously we really appreciate that. And at the end of the day, as Mr. Osmond said, we're looking for cooperation. He has been very, very open about the fact that he wants to work with the city of Grande Prairie and work with local businesses, local developers. It would be, I think, remiss for me to say that we are very, very supportive of regional collaboration, whether it be with the county, local businesses, local landowners, City of Grande Prairie. We would really like to see a way out of this that doesn't cripple a land developer, but also works for the city. So if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Okay, thanks very much, gentlemen. An opportunity for council to ask any questions of the applicant. Any questions for the applicant? Councillor Bressie.
Great, thank you. I've got a couple questions for you. One was, you brought up a couple of times this road that got closed. I'm wondering if you could highlight to me what your conversations with city administration were before that. You mentioned your conversations with Alberta Transportation and the county, but can you tell me what conversations you had with the city about that? Sure.
So I'll give you a bit of history on this. So this goes all the way back to the Trader Ridge Outland Plan, and provincial politicians, MLAs, whatnot. We were advised that there was some concerns with closing 140th Avenue, which was the county's gravel road that accessed the highway, and concerns from local businesses in the county. So that discussion was quite lengthy, to be honest. Those conversations went back to County of Grande Prairie. We literally rejigged access points about 14 times. The city didn't want traffic on 102nd Street, so we couldn't put an access there. Essentially, we came up with a location that made it somewhat difficult for people to get in and out. Mr. Osmond, to be quite honest, wasn't really supportive of, because the county's all gravel, so not overly supportive of mud tracking onto city roads and whatnot, and him having to maintain that. So very, very complicated situation where we had businesses on one side of a municipal boundary wanting something and in the other municipality not. So essentially what happened was our outline plan outlines that there at some point should be a connection between the two. There's a lot of gray area there as to whether it's a paved access or a gravel access or a temporary access or a permanent access, where it is, how it looks, those types of things. So with the first phase of Trader Ridge, we constructed a temporary access with an easement in the city of Grand Prairie's name from 103rd Street North. So it is, I don't know if there's a map I can kind of direct you guys to it, but that access stayed there for approximately a year and a half. Turns out there's a lot of people coming from the county into the city. So the concern from the city is that it's overly used and it's a difficult road to maintain because it's gravel. And from our perspective, it's temporary. So our intention is not to pave it because we don't know if that's ultimately where the road will go. So I got a call from engineering, who I want to say approximately a month and a half ago, saying that potentially they would close that access due to the number of complaints that they had gotten about it. The county is receiving the same number of complaints, by the way, just as a note. And recognizing that probably any passenger vehicles that are using it are county residents going to city businesses, or vice versa. There are some industrial uses out there that honestly we would love it if they didn't use that road as well. But it is a connection and it does provide access. And to be quite honest, one of the determining factors for the co-op to going to that location was the proximity of the Whispering Ridge and Westlake developments, and they need a certain number of rooftops in order to make a store viable. And a connection allows a little bit easier access. Not that they wouldn't get there, but it does allow an easier access between those county developments. So we were just informed, basically, that the road was going to be closed.
So I think specifically more what I'm trying to find out is, as you stated that the city closed it due to an unwillingness to maintain it, I'm wondering what kind of process he followed to talk to the city, to make sure they were aware of maintenance requirements or willing to take that on, and also what conversations he had with our engineering department to ensure that that road would be safe for all. Basically what I'm asking is, did you follow the normal I know that you've done a lot of work in the city getting roads built and things like that. Were those processes followed here, or was this an abnormal process for that access?
It's a bit of an abnormal process in that it's not in a city right of way. So the access, the construction, we did submit drawings to engineering, but there's no formal approval because it was an afterthought based on complaints from the county and transportation. So no, it wasn't a typical process from a we submit drawings, get them approved, enter a servicing agreement, those types of things. It is constructed to City of Grand Prairie standards, if that's the concern. There's culverts replaced. We've had it is maintainable, I guess, if that's the concern. We haven't. It's actually it's on private property within an easement currently. So the solution that we had was to place what we were going to do was place a no trespassing sign on the road, because essentially it's on private property. But before we could get to doing that, it was barricaded.
So just to be really clear, usually when you're accessing city roads, I believe that usually you need city approval to do that. That was not obtained in this case.
I will have to confirm. We did submit drawings to engineering for the construction of the road, but I don't have the exact. I can give you a time flow if you want on it, but I don't recall.
Okay. If I may ask a different question.
You know what, Councillor, I'm going to, if you come back, we'll go to Councillor Palat, and then if you want to come back in the queue, we'll make sure everybody gets opportunity. Councillor Palat.
Thanks, Mayor Gibbon. You'd mentioned that you bought the land in 2008, and just looking at the report, it was approved in 2014. I'm just kind of wondering, I know it's not a normal piece of land with some of the challenges you had. We've got kind of a canola to key process we're trying to work on in the city. Can you kind of let me know when you guys decided to go from, hey, we want to go to development, and kind of the timeline it took from there to get to the 2014 when the outline plan was adopted, or the ASP was adopted?
So in 2008, it was owned by Husky Energy on the 20 acres alone, and then it took several years after Sam bought the original 20 acres and understanding what was happening with planning and 132 Ave and so forth. It took several. It took a long time to be able to buy Grande equipment. They weren't sellers either. They ended up retiring actually when they moved off the site, selling off their brands and whatnot. And then it took quite a bit of time after that to assemble the 122 acres. So by the time we did the assembly, it was the early part of this decade. So it wasn't 2008 that we were there to actually move forward with everything. It was a progression based upon Sam wanting to start with the 20 acres, and that's all he was looking to do, to expanding it for reasons that he was asked to do. And it was the same thing again with the delays and us moving forward with everything, even though we had some deals on the interior land, was we were letting the city collaborate with the county as well as Alberta Transportation. So these weren't our delays. And in fact, when the time came, the economy wasn't great to move forward, to actually do the work on the site and move forward with everything. And, Sam did one of these, looked around, and he said, Drayton Valley's off the table. I think Athabasca was off the table. He pulled all the other developments we were doing with them and said, we're focused on Grande Prairie because we're getting the most collaboration here. And then when it came further down the road, that kind of abruptly ended with your tax assessment department and so forth, and it caused quite a bit of pain actually. So that's kind of the timeline. Did I answer the question?
I guess I'm just kind of wondering when it started getting to the city saying, here's the drawing, here's a concept, like, was this a 3-year canola to key, 4-year canola to key, just so I kind of understand the timeline of that part without the land acquisition side,
Is the 2014, and you're gonna have to help me out here, is that the subdivision approval or, okay.
That's outline plan approval.
That's the outline plan? Okay, so we probably had, I would say, 2 years, 3 years worth of, 2 years, 3 years worth of land acquisition. So Mr. Osmond purchased the southeast 20 acres first, then he purchased Grande equipment, then he purchased the remaining lands. So while that occurred, we were probably 1.5 to 2 years in there. And then I think we were roughly 3 in getting the outline plan approved. So we were, it's not that abnormal for an outline plan. I mean, it was lengthy. The biggest difficulty in that was the 3 kind of municipal jurisdictions and provincial authorities. So, we ended up dealing with Alberta Environment because apparently there's wetlands out there too. So we had quite the runaround with the outline plan. And we were just talking to engineering before this, and this access that Mr. Bressy's talking about was definitely front and center in some of the delays on that. So we've kind of brought something that was a little bit difficult to field in order to kind of make this happen.
Just to add to that, your 132 Avenue feasibility study was required from the standpoint that there was a lot of issues on the other side of the highway that the city didn't want to see on this side of the highway. So we needed to make sure that everything we did was rock solid with that plan, and that it created something on this side of the highway that actually would work to how the city wanted it to work. And we were amenable to doing that. And that, again, caused us to develop the entire parcel at the same time in a bad economy.
I'll come back to that.
I see Councillor Bressie.
Great, thank you. I'm kind of curious. You keep on saying the city wanted this in terms of getting bigger. I'm curious, was there ever any conditions of getting your outline plan done, or was there at any point you were told you need to bring more land on in order at once to get this approved?
No, so when we say the city was looking for it, that was mostly discussions with economic development being trying to be proactive and reactive to businesses. So obviously, there's never a requirement to purchase more land or develop more land. There was a tendency in the discussions to veer towards that, being market ready, being available. We did have discussions early on. Like I said, this was bought in stages, so the first 20 acres. Posed a bit of a problem for the city because it was already zoned CA. So technically under I can't remember, I think it's the Municipal Government Act, I'm not positive. One of the major legislative acts, the city of Grande Prairie has to provide access to a parcel. Because it was zoned decades before this. But because that was an available parcel and Mr. Osmond wanted to develop it, the city kind of indicated that all we would get would be a single right in, right out, which met the legal requirements, but would not meet any business requirements as far as access. So the difficulty in getting someone to move onto a parcel where all they get is a right in, right out access for a 20-acre parcel of land is probably not feasible. So he then currently went on to buy the next 10 acres, which connected to 102nd Street, which then provided him a secondary access, but still no access off of 100th. So the remaining land purchase was basically to make the entire project feasible and viable. And it went through multiple stages as far as marketing and whatnot, but that's sort of the progression. Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Rusty. Councillor Palat.
Thanks, Mayor Griffin. Just wondering, I guess, then on that, like, was it, you guys had mentioned earlier about staging or doing phasing, which is more normal in development. Why was the decision to go with the whole development at once instead of phasing it, which would be more, typically more typical to do?
We didn't do the whole development at once. The city assumed we did. There was 20 or 40 acres that we were discussing with Mayor Given. That was not part of it. We wanted to, there was the economics of it, but mostly it was just the functionality of the site, trying to make it work, as Scott mentioned, on a business side. But just to be clear, that was not fully developed. I think the city made a mistake in developing or in taxing the entire site when they shouldn't have. There was phase 1, phase 2. Phase 2 was never part of it.
Councillor Bressie.
Great, thank you. So the assessment's come up a few times. As I'm sure you're aware, City Council and most city administration doesn't actually have any authority to set assessment. There is a legislative process to do that, which is through the Assessment Review Board. And ultimately, if you don't agree with that, to the Court of Queen's Bench. I'm curious if you think the assessment's wrong, was there any effort, or did you ever go to an assessment review board to argue your assessment?
For which year? Are you talking about which taxation year?
So any taxation years.
We argued the point in 2008. Again, we met with council, and it was 2018 was the year that was in question. We felt that the taxation was excessive based on the fact that there was still approximately 3.2, 3.5 million. I don't know the exact number. You can talk about that as far as the cost to complete. So we were assessed full market value on a piece of property that was not complete. And again, we met about this a few months back, and the city's position was that we didn't appeal. So we couldn't do anything about it based on your MGA. The city had the authority to make that decision to help us with the assessment, which we thought was very high. And there's a lot of talk about setting precedents, that you didn't want to set precedents. I asked the question, has this ever happened before with any other appeal? And the question was no. Now I'm just listening to Scott, and Scott mentioned that he was here on the same appeal regarding the zoning, and he was approved. So my question is, when we were meeting a few months back and you were talking about precedence, I hope that now that precedence is set with Mr. Rossler, that you don't prejudice our position.
So, Councilor Rusty?
So again, my question is, there's two different matters here. There's the assessed value of your property, which the total tax bill is based on, and that is a legislative process that happens. And then there's also the Municipal Government Act. Once your tax bill is set, gives council the ability, if it deems it fair and equitable to do so, to forgive a portion of that tax bill. The Municipal Government Act doesn't give council the authority or the ability to change your assessment or change what that tax bill was. It just gives us the ability to forgive a part of that. The legislative process to appeal your assessment and say that assessment is too high, as you've said a couple times tonight that you feel it is to go through the Assessment Review Board. It's not a city process, that's a provincial process. Have you ever gone to the Assessment Review Board to argue that that assessment's too high?
No.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the delegation? Ms. Russell, I guess I could ask you this question. In terms of the roads, the internal roads, 102nd, and I guess it's 103rd, when a developer constructs roadways like that and turns them over to city, what's the warranty period? Or is there a period for deficiency typically in development? I could probably ask the same question of administration, but I know you probably know the answer to that as well.
No, so from construction completion certificate, and there are separate ones for roadworks, separate sidewalks, boulevard trees, things like that. But it's 2 years. So, and that's passed on to our contractors. So I don't have the dates in front of me, but the CCC for that for the roadworks is close to this year. It's probably going to be spring by the time that's all done. So it's still currently under warranty. There's nothing in Trader Ridge that is not under warranty right now.
Sure.
Councillor Bessie, just to add, 2019 taxes are under appeal. So where they end up, whether they end up at the review board or not, that remains to be seen, but they are under appeal.
Okay. Thank you. I don't see anybody else in the queue, gentlemen. Thanks very much for being here this evening to present your case and your request. Certainly appreciate it, and appreciate the commendation on the city's cooperation at different points through the process and the willingness that you have to work with our community. Certainly appreciate that, Mr. Osmond. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Given, thank you for your time. Councillors, thank you for your time.
We are still in the public hearing on Bylaw C-1260-109. I'd ask if there's anyone else in support of the application that wished to come forward at this time. Is there anyone else in support of the application? Is there anyone opposed to the application that would wish to come forward at this time? I see one gentleman making his way forward. Sir, if you want to come down and sit yourself in front of one of the microphones there and just introduce yourself with your name so that we can make sure that we get it for our council minutes, and welcome.
My name is Doug Jensen.
Welcome, Doug.
I live in the city of Grande Prairie. I have shop facilities in the county. I own DW Jensen Drilling. The main reason I'm here is over the temporary road that was closed. I have a lot of concerns over the closure of that road. One of the big ones is safety. I do appreciate that the developer put the road in and actually did a pretty good job of it. There has been lack of maintenance on it. I kind of have the feeling that nobody really knew who should maintain it. I know the county graded it once. The city has graded it several times. It had been kind of the last month or 6 weeks been forgotten, I guess. The snow was plowed on it last winter. There's a huge amount of traffic used that road. Not only residents from areas north of there, business on both sides used it. The big safety thing of it, I don't know whether people realize it, but the school buses use that road rather than going out and on the bypass, which is, let's face it, is not the safest place in the world to drive. Also, if they go out on the 4-lane, they have to go all the way down to the lights at the UFA to safely cross the traffic to go into that residential area with students. So it makes me nervous now that the buses will have to use that route, and there's weekly accidents at that corner. Hopefully a bus will never be involved. For my own concern, it now makes, for me to safely go to work, because my shop is right on 140th, safely I have to go all the way to the UFA corner to come back to my shop. We buy our fuel from the other side of the highway. When the lights were put in at Windsor Ford, it made access for my trucks much safer, shorter time frame. We do use 103rd to access 132nd, both for business and personal use. It allows me to go home in 5 minutes rather than 20. So the other thing that I was told by dealing with the city a little bit, that they shut the road down. One of the reasons was because last winter there was an accident where somebody coming from the east went through the dead end and destroyed all the cement blockades there. But that has nothing to do with that temporary road. They were going east-west, not north-south. So I don't feel that's a legitimate reason to be shutting the road down over that. I understand there is some liability concerns, but there's liability. It means the city doesn't own the road. Maintaining it, if it was graded every couple of weeks, would probably suffice. I mean, a lot of the bad road is people have bad driving habits. Causes most of your maintenance problems on it. There was stop signs at both ends of it. So I would really, and I think a lot of other people would appreciate if that road was opened back up again.
Thanks, Mr. Jensen. Was there anything else that you wanted to share with us?
Well, I have one complaint.
By all means.
I sent an email to all the councillors. I also sent an email to the councillor for that area for the county. The councillor from the county did respond, basically told me I was on my own. I did not receive one response from anybody in the city.
And here you are today with all of us.
Yeah. So at least I got you all cornered.
Well, actually, this is why we have public hearings. So the public is welcome to come and make a delegation exactly like this to all council members in the context of a public hearing where we're discussing the very issue that you're here today to bring forward to us. So I'm glad that you're able to take advantage of that opportunity.
And I didn't realize that the transportation and the county had basically asked the developer to put that road in. So, I mean, it wasn't like the good news is heart. I don't blame them. It's a $40,000 piece of road. It's now not going to be used.
Ms. Jensen, I did have one question for you. So do you continue on down 102nd Street? Like, is that what you said you sort of,
normally
when you were using this?
We cross on that piece of road to go to down 102nd to 132nd.
Mm-hmm.
I live in Royal Oaks, so there's good access from there.
Sure.
It's good access to 132nd, which allows us to go to 116th because a lot of our work is south of Grande Prairie.
Mm-hmm.
So it gives good access to 116th.
Yeah.
And let's face it, the corner at 132nd and 100th is not a great corner.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to be redeveloped. It hasn't been. So when lights at Windsor Ford were put in, that was quite a savior. I've also noticed that a lot of people coming in on the 4-lane from the north turn at Windsor Ford over to 102nd rather than go through that corner. And a lot of them turn and continue west on 132nd. They just avoid that corner.
Mm-hmm.
So those roads are all very well used. And the temporary road, I'll tell you, in the morning and at 5 o'clock, it's rush hour on that road.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very well used.
Certainly.
I think I understand where the co-op's coming from. A lot of that traffic would go to the co-op.
Sure.
And other businesses plan on building there.
Sure.
So I think it's a very important road that should be looked at and reopened.
Okay. Thanks very much for being here this evening to present. I will ask if there's any questions for the delegation. And we might try to make sure that it's actually a two-way conversation, and I don't see anybody ringing in with any questions for you? So, Mr. Jensen, thanks very much for being here this evening. Appreciate it. Was there anybody else that wished to make a presentation to council related to this matter? I don't see anybody coming forward. Before I close the presentation submission portion of the public hearing and we move on to business arising, I'll give council members any last opportunity for any questions they might have for administration. Councillor Platt.
Thanks, Mayor Goodwin. I'm just wondering, with the last discussion here about access, I believe originally when this was, there was the access got moved from closer to 102nd down to 103rd, if I remember right, on the original point of why we wouldn't want access to the north, I guess. Just thinking about being a business that could potentially land in that area, that does have an impact on them attracting tenants. I'm just wondering why we wouldn't want access in that location that was more permanent.
Ms. Downing?
Thank you. Through the chair, I think I'll ask Christine Donnelly from Transportation to talk about transportation.
Ms. Donnelly, while you're getting set, if please come on, have a seat, and just I'm not sure if it'd be you or Ms. Downing, but if somebody could also answer related to that, what did the outline plan say would need to be presented in order to fix the location of that access road? Ms.
Thanks. And through the chair, the transportation has been quite a challenge up in that area, and we particularly were made aware of it when we worked on the 132nd Avenue functional study and took a look at how the access is along that road. And because of the traffic volumes and that led us to realize we had to actually expand our scope of work and look at 100th Street. So we did expand that functional and look at that. So maybe some of you remember what occurred, and it did take some time to come up with accesses that really worked for Trader Ridge, as well as making sure that traffic on the overall network still functioned properly. And so the outline plan states that as a result of the closure of 140th Avenue, a road connection between 139th and 140th Avenue is proposed. The alignment of this connection may be located between 103rd Street and 101st Street. The location shall be determined through a transportation impact analysis at the time of subdivision application without further amendment to this document. It talks about as the next sentence isn't really related. So it was unknown. What occurred when the TIA was done, the TIA scope that the developer was working on was specific to Trader Ridge. We were never able to conclude a TIA that gave us enough information to figure out the location of the access. The challenge with doing that was the fact that the land to the north in the county, there is not an area structure plan for a portion of it, and we weren't sure how the roads would connect, and we didn't know how much traffic would be coming through there. We knew that 102nd Street was quite a challenging road for us with traffic calming and issues we have throughout the city. So discussions that I ended up having with Scott Rosler was that if there was going to be a connection, the best location would be at 103rd. In all the documentation and everything we did, we talked about it being part of a future subdivision phase. And so it was not part of the subdivision that was done. We did, to protect the alignment, register an easement so that that alignment would be preserved should we need to go ahead and put it in at an earlier date. And so that was kind of the phasing and the TIA. Hopefully that answers some of your question.
Councillor Platt?
I guess somewhat. I guess the concern is that it was completed now, like the whole development has been completed. So if there wasn't a road alignment that was supposed to be phased in, and if the whole thing's been built out, it just seems like there should be a road alignment. It's a little bit concerning to me just to think that we've basically put an island there now and with no access into it from the north at all. And it just, I guess I'm a little concerned about the planning, thinking about how does an ambulance, how does a fire truck, how does a police car, it has to go all the way around now to get through that area. And, you know, I can realize this is a county city thing, but at the end of the day, I was hoping that planning would be looking at it going, we still need access through 4 quarters of a quarter. So just wondering why, with it being completed, why it's still not being built. If the development's completed and all the roads are built out, if I understood you right, you said it had to be phased, and if it was phased, we'd build it later, but the whole development's been built out. So that would, I guess, from a sales perspective, I have to believe better access is going to help with sales, and so I think it's, you know, I'd certainly like to help this development get off the ground, and limiting access probably not doing that.
Ms. Donnelly, do you have a comment to that? I think that was more of a position. Maybe Councillor Platt.
Well, no, I'm curious of why it's not built. I guess, I mean, the development's built out. I'm not sure why there's not access there.
Ms. Donnelly?
Through the chair, the development is not built out. There is still a remaining phase. It is smaller, but that top northwest corner, which this potential connection is on, has not been developed or subdivided or serviced. There's a road connection that extends west into Arbor Hills as well. That is also outstanding. So there's two connections that are missing. This was a substantial phase for sure. It's quite a bit bigger than usual, but the land is not complete.
Okay. So if I'm understanding right, the CGDUR, the bigger piece, that's the 30-acre piece that hasn't been subdivided into smaller parcels yet. Is that in the, I guess, south? Sorry, the northwest corner.
So through the chair. So from where that 103rd is.
Yep.
Maybe
west?
we have a whole bunch of maps on a whole bunch of computers. Maybe we could put one up on screen so we can just identify which parcels
This one?
would have future roadways that haven't been subdivided.
Okay, it is on the screen. So this piece has not been developed.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor O'Toole.
Yes, you just leave that back up there. I've got a question. So there's a road that's blocked off now, that the city has blocked off. Can you explain to me where that road is? That one there, okay? And the line 140th is the road that the county insisted on being built? Correct?
Through the chair, there was a road, 140th Avenue, continued along the north boundary of this parcel and came out onto the highway. It was an all-directional access that was not signalized and did not have turn bays. It had very little usage because of the lack of probably the signals and those types of things. It was used as quite frequently as a right in, right out. A lot of the traffic in here in the commercial industrial area to the north there was evidence, obviously, the businesses were utilizing that to get in and out of there. But for traffic to get to traffic signals, this land had to go down to, there's 148th Avenue, which is not signalized, and then the next one further up is signalized. So there is quite a distance to the north for traffic to go to get a fully signalized intersection.
So just to clarify, there looks like there's 3 accesses off of 140 into the county side, and technically there's 0 accesses coming into the city side, except for the one that was put in as an afterthought. Correct?
So through the chair, this 140th was closed. That would force all of this traffic here to go back to the north to 148th until such time, or unless there's an access in to come down in through this road here, which is why there was quite a desire for this temporary access.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bressie.
Great, thank you. I'm just wondering, this temporary access that's been closed, how does it line up with city design standards for signalization, traffic safety, all of that?
Ms. Donnelly?
So the temporary access that's been constructed is gravel, and the road in 140th Ave in the county is gravel. It was not built to any current city standards. The expectation was that in the future, when the subdivision came into this side, we would have figured out some of these challenges we were having, and that this would then be subdivided as a road right away, paved, and all those types of things. When it was getting used, there was some quite a bit of usage. It was determined that some signs needed to go up. The land developer did go and throw some stop signs just to improve safety up there. Right now, people are driving across the sidewalk. So once it becomes a public road, the sidewalk would be removed, curb and gutter extended, those types of things. This time, there's nothing that would suggest that this is ever a signalized intersection on either side. But again, we were never able to complete a TIA because there wasn't a clear understanding of the traffic from the north.
See Councillor Palat.
Thanks, Mayor Gibbon. I'm just wondering if we have an idea. I guess I could have asked Mr. Osmond and Mr. Rosser when they're up here the same question, but do we have an idea of what the cost for all the improvements on 132nd Ave, on 100th Street, and the lights at 102nd Street and the lights at 139th Ave? Do we have any idea of what, in our report it says the city's contributed about $467,000. Do we know what the contribution was from the developer to do all these improvements that somewhat would have had, maybe not all of them had been done, but quite a few of those would have had been done to make that corridor more safe and feasible for traffic?
Sonally?
We have all of those costs in a servicing agreement. I don't have it at my fingertips and handy to answer your question, but we shared in the cost of the 139th and, the 139th and 100th Street, that intersection we shared in the cost. So, and we in that intersection invested 400 and some dollars. That included the extension of the road east to that cul-de-sac and storm. So there was quite a bit of improvement there. Scott probably would have to give you the actual numbers, but I don't have it handy.
Sorry, Mayor, is it okay to, I appreciate we close that part, but if they have the data, is it okay to ask rather than trying to?
Well, if Mr. Rossler wanted to give that number.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Rossler. So Mr. Rossler from the crowd answered approximately 2.5 million. Okay, I don't see anybody else in the queue. Councillor Platt, do you have something further?
Some of the tax implications that we had, it was alluded to. I know that this had come to corporate services, but do we have a magnitude of what the tax amount was the year that it was assessed, what we've collected in taxes per year, and what the new value is? I think there was a comment made from Mr. Rosser around $60 million, but is that a number that we could be able to understand? I'm just trying to understand the magnitude of what this development's brought outside of the potential capital investment, what it's brought as far as tax base to the city.
Mr. Glavin or Ms. Walker, do you have some sense?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Gibbon. That's certainly a knowable piece of information. I don't have that at this time, but it's something we could get.
But probably fair to recognize that, in terms of the investment in structures on the parcel today, that $60 million today is probably pretty accurate. And so, working backwards and levying the city's current tax rate is probably reasonable. But any other questions for administration? I had one. This would be for Ms. Walker, and I wanted to understand at an order of magnitude what the impact would be on the rest of the tax base. We see in the report that the parcels in this application generated about $336,000 in property tax revenue. My question is essentially, what is the impact on the rest of the property tax? What sort of property tax increase would be required on other parcels in the property to make up that $336,000? Ms. Walker?
Thank you, Mayor Gibbon. So what would be the impact on the rest of the community?
Yes.
Well, it would be the difference between that 336 and $15,000 to $50,000. Sure. So it would be approximately 300,000.
Sure, but percentage, we're really used to talking in terms of property tax percentage increase, and we use our 4.1% reduction this year, and so this would be roughly equal to.
Would be approximately 1/3 of a percent.
Okay, so yeah, okay. 0.3% increase on the rest of the tax base.
That's correct.
Any other questions for administration? Well, actually, one other question of a technical nature. Does council, and this might end up being for our legislative services manager or for planning, whoever's more comfortable in answering it, does council have the ability to amend the bylaw that is in front of us? We have a draft bylaw amendment, and if council wished to exclude certain parcels from the rezoning, do we have that ability here today?
Thank you.
Downing?
Through the mayor, the act says that council can make any amendment it sees fit to a bylaw. There is some cases where, you know, a court may challenge if you're going well beyond what the bylaw was advertised. Mm-hmm. But generally, the line in the act says that council can amend the bylaw.
Has the ability to. Okay. Thank you very much. So we will close the presentation submission portion of the hearing. Council has had an opportunity to ask questions of administration, and we need to move on to business arising. And in order to start discussion debate on this, we do need a motion for first reading. Can I get a motion for first reading, please? Councillor Friesen?
Oh, now I have to find it. So I will make that motion. I move that council give first reading to bylaw C 1395A being an amendment. Oh, no, I don't. Sorry.
1260.
Yeah, I'm on the wrong one here. Yep. We give first reading to bylaw C 1260-109 being an amendment to the bylaw land use bylaw.
Thanks very much, Councillor Friesen. So no discussion or debate on first reading. I will call for the vote. Please vote. Thank you. That motion carries. Councillor Friesen.
Thank you. So I will now move that council give second reading to bylaw C-1260-109 being an amendment to the land use bylaw. And I will speak to this motion. So administration has recommended that we defeat at second reading of this bylaw. I'd like to encourage my colleagues to actually think very seriously about passing this bylaw. You may remember that I was, I'm sure Mr. Rossler will, that I was against this when I think it was probably the better part of a year ago that he was before us with another of his clients, another developer. And I have grown in my understanding and appreciation since then. And while I, at that time, had said this is not what land use bylaw, what rezoning is for, I really see more upside to doing this, to making this amendment for the developers than downside, even considering the tax impact. Trader Ridge has brought a great deal of excellent development to Grande Prairie, what is already there and what we are already seeing tax return on, as well as what is now being developed. And I am fully confident that Mr. Osmond is moving forward certainly as quickly. He does not want to sit on this any longer than we want to see this sat on. And I just see no worse downside than there is a good upside to this. I would like council to support this bylaw amendment. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Friesen. I see a couple others in the queue. I see Councillor Palat, Councillor Bresci, and maybe I'll just go in between the two of you so that I'm jumping into the queue somewhere rather than at the start or at the close. But Councillor Palat, you're first up.
Thanks, Mr. This is a tough one. I can appreciate. I've always been the one saying I want to make sure our spending's in line, but I also want to be really cognizant of what's happening in the economy. I can have a lot of empathy there. I'm guessing that they're probably in a 20 million plus range of what they've invested into this development at this point. The economy has done substantial turns. Whether we want to believe it or not, in 2014 we did not have two governments in power, both provincially and federally, that have made a big impact on investment and spending in Alberta. There's been $30 billion worth of investment leave Alberta in the last 4 years alone, just in the oil and gas sector. So that's having a massive impact. And, you know, I've heard around this council chambers many times, if we want developers to be ready, we want them to be ready. This is exactly what happens when they're ready and the market turns. And we're fortunate that Mr. Osmond has enough depth to maybe see this through. This would have bankrupted most of people. This is not something that most people would even get through. So I as much as it's sad to see the city potentially lose revenue, I am urging council to support this one. I think this is, we have to be open and available to the business community. And this thing sitting there empty and growing weeds is not good for the business community. It's not good for investment and attraction. It also concerns me a lot that, you know, having a bunch of vacant land, I've seen this happen in other parts of Alberta when the market's turned, having a bunch of vacant land and a developer that finally says, I'm out, and just starts throwing out land on sale just to get it off his books is not good for us, guys. This might seem like a hit, but this could, if we continue down this path and force this developer into this, and he says, fine, I'm just going to chunk it off at 215 acre and get the heck out of Grande Prairie, we're going to see a lot more issues with our tax valuation on a lot more properties than just this one. So I'm urging you to think about the lot bigger picture here. This might seem like a bit of a hit today, but this is going to be a much bigger hit if we continue down this path and watch a lot of land sit around that we don't need currently in our economic times. It could be brought on the market within 180 days, I believe Mr. Elser stated. I think that's a reasonable amount of time to bring it back on. And I think if we leave this piece of land sit there vacant and we end up getting a developer that says, okay, I just need to move out, and starts throwing sticker tags on this stuff, it's going to make it very difficult because there's a lot of land vacant in Grande Prairie right now. So I just really caution us to think about that. And to kind of Mr. Elser's point, although it looks like a $335,000 loss, we're probably going to see that at least in tax growth on the 5 or 6 CR units that are being built this year. So this piece of land is still going in the black overall in growth. It might look like it's going in the red on this part of it, but overall, this piece of land is bringing growth to the city on our tax base. So I'd really caution you guys to really think about the long-term cases and not just, oh boy, it's a $335,000 loss today. This could have a huge impact on our city's tax base moving forward in a negative way.
Thanks, Councillor Plott. So I'll just enter to say that I can't support the second reading as is. I appreciate actually both perspectives. I think that there's a bit of a soft position. I have a bit of a challenge suggesting that the lands in the center of the parcel, center of the development, are agricultural lands. The other ones are contiguous and adjoined to agriculture property, and I can make a reasonable case that those are. I would have a difficult case making a case that the other parcels are also agriculture, and we have city assets there in the form of the sidewalk, curb and gutter, and the roadway that I would be concerned about having use over those in a period of time where there is no development, and I would hate to see those assets degraded just by use and equipment being transferred over and everything else. And ultimately costing taxpayers more down the road because they would eventually be out of warranty, as is the city's practice, and they should no longer be the developer's responsibility. And so, you know, I certainly can get behind and support an approach that would say those lands that are directly adjacent to other land that's being farmed, there's a reasonable case there. When I look at the bylaw, and that's why I asked the question, I look at the bylaw and I see that point 3 in the bylaw actually describes those lands, if I'm interpreting it correctly. Point 3 describes the lands that are in the center of the parcel, the center of the development. I should just check to make sure I'm interpreting it right, because legal land description and lots maybe are not my strong point, but I believe that points 1 and 2 describe the lands that are contiguous with the farmland. And I think point 3 describes the lands that are in the center. If council has an interest in finding a soft position that doesn't shift that total of $300,000 to the rest of the tax base, to each of our property taxes and every other resident out there, but acknowledges that we do want developers to be invested in the community and finds a bit of a balance, I would suggest removing those lands in the center of the development from this rezoning is about a 50-50 and would be a way for us to sort of balance those off and protect the city's assets. the physical assets in terms of the roads that are there. So that would be the kind of solution that I would like to be able to support. Councillor Bressie.
Great, thank you. Well, it appears that Councillor Friesen and I are going to be swapping votes on this issue. I can't support this bylaw, and I think for a few reasons. One is I think we're overstepping our legislative authority by doing this. Two, I'm worried that we're opening up the city to very huge costs beyond this in the future. And three, I think it's poor land use planning. First of all, our legislative authority, I think that the Municipal Government Act is very clear that the role of council when it comes to taxation is to set the entire tax levy that we're going to put on segments of the tax base, and then a legislative process figures out how that gets split up fairly. I think that the Municipal Government Act gives us some very clear ways to put our thumbs on taxes, and I think this is kind of an end run around those. And I think that by playing with rezoning in order to address taxation, I personally feel that that's overstepping what was envisioned for us in terms of our scope and what we can do when the Municipal Government Act was created. Second reason is when it comes to taxation, what's equitable is a very important thing, and I'm really worried if we say yes to this, then how do we not say yes to every single person that comes and asks for a downzoning to save their tax bill? I appreciate that there's significant investment here. I appreciate that the economy's changed the last couple of years, but I have troubles figuring out why we'd say yes to this for taxation to save taxes and not yes to other things. And I wonder, we're talking about a few $100,000 now. Well, if this conversation continues, how much more, significantly more, are we talking about in the future? However, the big thing for me is all about land use planning. That's what, when we talked about this a year ago, we were talking about land planning uses. And I remember there was both a land planning conversation and a tax question. And there were some who suggested, hey, we shouldn't allow this to change because it'll cost the city taxes. And that argument didn't ring true to me. I didn't think that the tax bill should sway what we decide when it comes to land use planning. For me, on that development, there were some really clear community impact issues going on with that development in terms of unsightliness, in terms of illegal dumping, that the applicants were saying, hey, they felt that rezoning would help them deal with those. I'd note that driving past it, I don't know if our change was successful on that property. I sure haven't noticed the difference. But also what's different about that property and this property when we talk about land use is the property we rezoned earlier, it was surrounded on one side by 92nd, on another side by railway tracks, and on the other sides by other empty land. This land is surrounded on all four sides by either commercial or industrial or residential land. So it's a different site context. And also the big difference between this land and the land we rezoned previously was this land is fully serviced. The other land not only was not serviced, but there were also very significant barriers to servicing that. And that's why back then I could get on board with rezoning that for land use planning reasons. And the tax impact, I didn't love to lose some money as the city, but I was putting a land use planning hat on, because when I read the MGA, that's what we're supposed to be considering when we're considering zoning requests. We're supposed to be considering what impact does this have on the land around it and on the community as a whole, not on the tax base. So as much as I'm sympathetic to this, I just don't think that this is an appropriate interpretation of the MGA. Last thing I'll say is, in this conversation, as sympathetic as I am as what's happened, I've been kind of bothered by some of the arguments that have been made. And I think that that is in terms of a narrative of our staff pushed something, and for some reason the decision to bring this whole phase online was the fault of our staff. The idea of that our staff have overassessed this when it has not been taken to an assessment review board yet. The idea of our staff are being unreasonable with this road when it didn't go through the normal processes to open. I don't know everything that happened there. I don't know all the ins and outs. I definitely know that but at the same time, I feel like our staff got thrown under a bus a lot more than they deserve to be. And I don't think they deserve to be thrown under the bus at all. And that's how I feel it was. And that bothered me. But the main reason I can't support this is because of the land use plan. I just don't see a good land use planning argument for this. So I won't be supporting this.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Bressie. Councillor Thiessen.
Thanks, Councillor Bressie. I had a couple of points and you listed them off, but I'll just throw in my 2 cents here. I too am not going to support well, I guess I'm going to support administration's recommendation and not any further action. Me too. I was a bit bothered by a lot of what I felt was finger pointing at our staff. At some point, we have to look in the mirror and take responsibility for ourselves, especially when we're the ones making the decisions. Also, in the context of that other land, I think I was on Councillor Friesen's side back then, and I spoke very strongly about the fact that this is one domino, and then once another domino falls, it'll be used as the precedent, and that was used as well here today as it was a precedent. Maybe it's just strictly an opinion, but I don't mean to be offensive by this. I think it's an opportunity here that we may be allowing a series of what I'm going to term as tax dodging. I know that there's money to be invested and there's risk that is inherent with that money that you're investing. But at the same time, I have to think in the best interests of my constituents, of the people in this community, and of our administration and staff. $300,000 hit, although Councillor Platt says is peanuts from what we can make later on. I still got to face the public tomorrow and the next day and tell them that this is the second time we're doing it, and then this argument just continues. Well, you did it before and you did it again, so why can't you do it for me? I don't mean any offense. I do believe that this Trader Ridge is going to flourish at some point, whether or not the economy picks up. In looking at that other land, I drive by it every single day. It too was asked to be farmed. I have never seen a tractor on that land, and I don't anticipate I'm going to see a tractor on this land as well. So, in saying all that, I'm sure this is going to come down to 1 or 2 votes. My vote is to support administration's recommendation, and all the other processes that were outlined by Councillor Bressie, according to the MGA, ARB, and any kind of appeals that you might be able to make. Those are ways to fight the system if you think it's unjust. But I've got to support my administration on this one.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Thiessen. I see Councillor Minhas.
Thank you, well, Mayor Gibbon. I like to support this, whatever they have Ms. Eunice said, but I'd like to amend this one. This motion to take the number 3 out and then move the rest one as a formal end.
Okay, so a motion to amend second reading?
Yeah.
Okay, so a motion to amend second reading to delete point 3.
Point 3, yeah.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Minhas. So we have an amendment to discuss and debate. The amendment would essentially remove point 3, which is the center parcels of the development, which would leave the rezoning only to apply to the lands, I guess, to the north and to the west. So open for discussion and debate on that point. Councillor Thiessen.
Thank you, Mayor Gibbon. A couple questions. I guess one just for legislative services manager over here. I guess my question is, what kind of risk do we put ourselves to if we were to rezone this one area as according to the amendment and setting a precedent that could be used against us in an assessment review? So if we said, okay, well, we're going to do this land, but we're going to allow this land, would that then trigger in assessment review the potential for that to work against us, whereas perhaps our tax evaluation or assessment is too high and we put ourselves at risk of still losing?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With regard to being at risk for tax assessment, at this time in a public hearing, you have as council the right to amend a motion. And the fallout or the results of that motion, it will be up to administration to deal with. And the motion that Councillor Minhas has made to amend second reading is in order. It's germane to the public hearing that we are currently in right now, and it affects the the bylaw amendment that's currently being discussed. So If you choose to amend this bylaw, that is within your right as council.
Okay, thank you for that. I guess, yeah, and sorry for the poor question. I was trying to think about exactly what I wanted to ask in there. My biggest concern is that council is going to appear wishy-washy, and that could work against us in any kind of appeal process. So I sympathize. I don't know how I'll vote on that. I may even just offer to table it if it passes as the amendment for a third reading at a later date, so I can stew on it for a bit and understand all the assessment risk as well as the taxation risks that we put ourselves at. I do like the idea of a compromise, but again, I don't want to put the city at jeopardy for whatever reason. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Thiessen. I'll just enter to speak to that point. I think ultimately, the city has to defend its assessments on a number of different factors. I think land being directly adjacent to farmland is a defensible position. Land being surrounded on all four sides by urban standard roadways would be much more difficult to make a case that that is farmland. And that's why I'm supportive of this amendment. I would encourage council to think about it that way. I think that that's a very defensible position when it comes to saying, well, why is this land different than the other lands? This land is different because if you look in an aerial photo, you can see land that is directly adjacent that is currently being farmed. And I think that that's a reasonable and defensible position. But just want to make sure that I spoke to that point. Councillor Plott?
Thanks, Mayor Given. I think this is a really good amendment. I'm probably even more comfortable with this amendment that way because I do think it said, I know we're worried about precedent setting. I think every time the table resets and the clock resets and new people walk in, we have the ability to set that precedence outside of administration. So I'm not worried about precedent setting. And I think we're already hearing about the land on 92nd Ave. It didn't set a precedence here because I don't think this would have passed. The first round wasn't probably going to pass. So having said that, I agree with Mayor Given. I think the land to the north on this is all currently being farmed on the north side of Arbor Hills. So it is just an extension of farmland that way. So I think optically it is a lot better fit. So I will be supporting the amendment.
Thanks, Councillor Plott. Councillor Friesen?
Thank you. I will support the amendment as well. I appreciate Mayor Given having brought forward the consideration that there are assets that are city held, and yeah, imagining the equipment over the that was something I hadn't considered. I did think that it was very different, Councillor Bressie, from the initial one, and that kind of factored in. But again, it's the size of this piece of property, and I'm sure if the developer were to go back in time, he would probably have left some of it at urban reserve for a time rather than going through this exercise. But I do think this is a good amendment, so I'll support it as well, and I hope that it gets us closer to finally passing the ultimate amendment. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Friesen. Councillor O'Toole.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given. I will be supporting this amendment. I wasn't too keen at the original one because I felt that wasn't something that I would be voting for. But at this stage, I would definitely vote for the amendment. And I want to thank you people for coming to Grande Prairie and making a huge investment. And I think we can maybe work together on this one. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor O'Toole. Councillor Plott, and then we would have gotten through everybody at least once. Councillor Plott.
Sorry, Mayor Given. I've just asked for a question for clarification more from administration. So would the intent, if this happened, would be the intent to be closing 139th Ave and 133rd Street around that area and barricading it, or would it be just leaving these roads open and just rezoning that to UR?
Ms. Downing?
Thank you. Through the mayor, the entire parcel would be consolidated into one piece because that's how it would work for assessment. The individual parcels alone wouldn't qualify for a farm assessment left subdivided because the first 3 acres is at market value. So the 3 pieces would be consolidated into one piece before they would be able to farm it. And as far as road closures, if the middle piece is still part of active development, I guess there would be consideration with that, with making any decisions about which roads are needed to serve the development.
Thanks, Councillor Platt. I guess just to address that point as well, you know, the connection to the development to the north, I think we've raised a really important challenge that we have as two different municipalities with different planning approaches. I can appreciate administration's challenge in trying to identify what traffic volumes will be if there's no ASP covering the lands to the north that says this is what kind of development is going to go here and here's how many vehicles you can expect from that kind of development. I'd suggest that this probably gives us an opportunity to work with the County of Grande Prairie to identify a better approach to traffic and transportation planning in the entire region. This isn't the only example of where the interface between the city and county is a bit of a challenge. We have other roads where the county has an explicit desire to see them paved so that people can get in and out of the city easier, where for city purposes it's actually not a major use. And we have areas where we would like to see the county make improvements to their roads so that we can get heavy truck traffic off the center of the city and move to the fringes of the city. So there's a bunch of different examples of this, and probably what we should do is add this to the list of those examples and start to have a good conversation with the county about how we can do a better job of planning these types of interfaces all across the city. So I would encourage council, I mean, the rezoning really is a different matter, maybe somewhat related, but I would encourage council to say this small transportation connection, important as it is to people, is one of many that we have the same challenge on. So let's put it into that bundle and address it with the county so we can come up with a better solution for everybody rather than trying to do a bunch of one-offs. But yeah, just on that road connection, just encourage us to think about it that way rather than individually trying to find a solution to this, because there are at least 5 more waiting behind it that we have to figure out jointly between the two of us. I don't see anybody else in the queue, so I will call for the vote on Councillor Minhas's amendment. This is the amendment to delete point 3. Please vote. Thank you. That motion carries. So we can move on to second reading as amended. Any discussion or debate on second reading as amended? We worked it all out of our system, I guess. Okay. Then I will call for the vote on second reading as amended. Please vote. Thank you. That motion carries. Can I get a further motion? Councillor Friesen.
Thank you. So I will now move that council have third reading of Bylaw C 1260-109 being an amendment to the land use bylaw as amended.
Thanks very much, Councillor Friesen. So everybody gets to hear my spiel on having third reading. So in order to have all 3 readings of a bylaw at the same meeting, council has to have a motion to have third and final reading here. In order for us to move on to that third and final reading, this must pass unanimously. If it does not, then it would come back at our next council meeting for that third and final reading. Are there any discussion and debate as to the merits of having third and final reading? Councillor Thiesen.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given. I know it seems weird that I was a yes and a no, and I saw Councillor Bressie was a yes and a no, probably just to the amendment. But there's a lot of things to consider in this, and for me personally, I'd like to have a little bit of time to think about it. I'd like to see what the impact on taxation is and hear administration's advice on what the impacts could be in assessment in any kind of appeal process. If administration has no qualms about it coming back to the next council meeting, I have no qualms in supporting this, as it's the will of council. So for that, I don't think jumping into it and just rashly changing the land use bylaw right now is the appropriate course of action. I would like 2 weeks to wait. So for that being said, I'd like to have those discussions with administration, understand it a little bit better myself as to what this is and could be, and then we can move forward. I don't think it would require our delegation to come back in on force from out of town, but if they so choose to, that's possible. It looks like it's going to pass anyways, but I'm going to be voting no. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Every council member obviously has that latitude. I'm going to do my best to try and work you off that position. Councillor Thiesen, I would encourage you, as you finished your comments, you said it looks like it's going to pass anyways. I think that that's the case. I see that there is a strong majority in support of moving forward. I'm not sure what benefit this provides council members. the public, the applicant, or management to have to bring back an issue that is most likely decided. Obviously, council members retain full ability to do that, but we have talked often about ensuring that we're moving things through the system in a timely basis and that we don't put up roadblocks within our administration. And this would be a roadblock that we're completely in control of ourselves. And certainly when it isn't likely to change the outcome of a vote, would certainly encourage council to allow it to move forward and then still vote your conscience on that third and final motion. But that's certainly that's my attempt to work you off that point. I don't see anybody else. I don't see anybody else in the queue. So I will call for the vote to have third and final reading. Please vote. Thank you. That motion does not pass unanimously, and so this consideration of third and final vote on this land use bylaw amendment will come back at our subsequent council meeting. We will move on in our agenda. From there, we are straight into council member reports. Councillor O'Toole, I think you're first on our list with the Francophone and Francophile Cities Network.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, I just returned from Moncton, New Brunswick, where they had a lot of Acadia-type events going through the whole entire province. Select communities held celebrations on a daily basis. I can tell you I walked through the city of Dieppe, and within about 50 feet, the Prime Minister Trudeau was in front of us, and I didn't acknowledge him or didn't even see him, to be honest with you. We also had our leader of the PC party as well, and once again, there was literally thousands of people walking through the parade. But to go with the actual intent to go down to this event was we had communities, sort of the same situation we had in Grande Prairie last year, where we had Louisiana, we had Quebec City, we had Moncton, and we had other communities in the Canada as well as the United States attending this event. And it was very interesting. To go beyond that, like I said, the Acadia people, they had members from just about every country in the world that were at one time had roots being kicked out of New Brunswick, had come back to a homecoming. And I think there was 28 families that came from Louisiana to have family reunions in Canada. So that was pretty interesting that we've had an Acadia background. So with all that, we had a number of things of topics to discuss, and I can supply a full report later on. But there was an eye-opening experience, and I'm glad I was able to make it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor O'Toole, for representing the City of Grande Prairie and Council at that event. Were there any other external reports that I missed? If not, I'll just provide a brief one. Considering that the endorsement of me to run it for the board again, probably worthwhile that I provide an update on AUMA activities. I will just provide a brief one. On behalf of AUMA, attended the Power Natural Gas Consumer Panel's strategic planning session in Edmonton last week. The panel was looking at setting up its activities for the coming year about how we represent the interests of consumers in that system. It's amazing the things that get decided that have an impact on your utility bills, particularly with respect to transmission and distribution costs. We all know that there's times during the summer where those are the biggest parts of your bill, but the Office of the Utility Consumer Advocate, who the panel works with, actually intervenes in cases where utilities are attempting to set their underlying cost structures that they get to pass on to consumers. And there are examples of large projects inside Edmonton and Calgary where their utilities are attempting to shift costs that might be a part of a municipal project onto the overall burden of the transportation system. And so the the UCA actually intervenes in those cases to say, hey, wait a minute, that shouldn't be borne by ratepayers all across Alberta. And so I'm learning quite a bit about the systems that are in place to protect Albertans' interests. You can expect me to share to council some information about the UCA, and I'll try and share that more with the community. But it's one of those things that I never would have had the opportunity to experience and to know and to share with you if I hadn't been serving there as a representative of AUMA. I also attended last week this week most recently passed, the AUMA Board of Directors meeting in Okotoks, where we also held a joint meeting with the board of RMA, the Rural Municipalities Association, where we discussed issues of common concern and common interest. I was very thankful for our council members hosting AUMA President Barry Morishita as he did his cross Alberta tour. Barry has been able to visit, I think, just under 100 AUMA members during his tour, as he tries to make sure that our organization really understands the needs of all of the different members from summer villages all the way up to Edmonton and Calgary. And so thanks very much to those council members who were here and were able to meet with Barry when he was in Grande Prairie. And that's all I had for AUMA. We'll move on to council member reports, and we'll start with Councillor Thiessen.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given. Had quite the busy couple weeks. It just tells you that council's getting ready for the fall and it's right through to a busy winter and spring. I did get to enjoy a couple events. Camp Healahart, again, I was there for their sponsor appreciation luncheon, which is great, seeing people's eyes open to what the services that they provide for children who are grieving in our community. I also got a tattoo on behalf of the City Center for the Downtown Association at Creative Training. I was there for a ribbon cutting, and they just needed a tattoo model. It wasn't a real tattoo, it washed off, so that was all good. And then I also got to enjoy Barry's company with several members of council, and then drive him back to his trailer back at the Rotary Campground. And then I took in the Bear Creek Folk Festival, which by all accounts was another visible and audible success. It's nice to see the hill was like super full for 3 days, especially the Saturday when it was really cold and rainy, and I suffered from umbrella thumb. It's a thing. That's just my God. Now I know what arthritis feels like. But thanks so much to everybody for making our center of the community so awesome, and our community so awesome in general. And I won't bore you with the rest of the stuff I did. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Thiessen. Councillor Platt.
Yeah, it definitely feels like the summer break was over. The last couple of weeks have definitely got busier again. Had 3 events that I want to highlight. The GP Storm had a golf tournament that I attended on last Saturday. They had good turnout, even though the weather, of course, was not great last Saturday. I haven't heard the final numbers on it yet, so I'll be able to report back to that at the next board meeting, but it seemed like a successful event. From there, I ripped over to the Bear Creek Folk Festival, and I was actually very proud of Grande Prairie after seeing how many people showed up, and which was not the best weather conditions. But it actually, I went back and forth personally on Bear Creek, but that one made me want to fund it more than I probably ever had before. I felt very proud that the city was supporting something at really poor times, and maybe people first personally financially, but also just the weather wasn't great. So good acts, was a good time. It was nice to see members of the community out. And then just today I got to do ribbon cutting and thanking the Recycle Plus on Mayor Given's behalf. And it was a good turnout, and just it's a good facility. It was nice to see, and just the comments that I heard from speaking to people there. Certainly not the concerns over the homeless people hanging out and loitering around there. It's been very respectful. They've been showing up. They cash their bottles in first thing in the morning when there's not usually a lineup, and they leave. So the comments back were very good, and it was just it was nice to see. That it was disheartening to hear that there's only 2 facilities in North America that take our aluminums, and they're neither one over in Canada. But it's another story for another day, I guess.
Thanks very much, Councillor Platt. Councillor Friesen.
Thank you. I was able to attend, a couple of my colleagues were there as well, barbecue that was hosted by Minister Taves. And that was farewell for Wayne Drysdale. And of course, MLA Tracy Allard was there as well. And it was a great evening to be able to thank Mr. Drysdale for his commitment to our region over the past number of years, and to get to know our new representatives a little bit, as well as talk with them a bit about what the needs for our city are. I also got to sit with a few, pretty involved community members and talk about some other concerns that are facing our city right now. So that, all in all, was a great evening, and a hearty thank you to Mr. Drysdale for those years. And then I also just want to mention that I attended the smudging and blessing of Bear Creek outdoor pool the other day. There are a few things that mean as much to me in the community as a faith or a wisdom tradition coming forward, and placing such a blessing on a facility where the community will come together, and we each had the opportunity to talk about what we were hoping to see from the facility, the outdoor pool there, and each of us said it's relationships, it's family, it's community, it's very much the memories of what happens there and what is built there, far outside of just having a great time in the afternoon sun. So that was a really beautiful morning, along with Councillors Bressie, Minhas, and Thiessen.
Thanks very much, Councillor Friesen. Councillor O'Toole.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given. On the 22nd, I happened to be at the A&W, along with Councillor Thiessen and Palat, and we had the biggest mouth contest. And I'm not sure who the person was that won, but I was there last year and I almost caused a guy to choke to death. So they told me to tone it down a little bit, but we did have a little prep talk before. Take small bites, eat fast, but it was all good. And I think this A&W here is now the 7th time most money raised for MS, and that was the location on Claremont Road. And the president or chair of the board for the MS Canada made a trip to Grande Prairie because she wanted to see who these kind people were. So so that was pretty good. I also attended a Feast of Warriors for the support of the Afghanistan Memorial and the education process that they are prepared and will be implementing in the curriculum in the schools. And on Sunday, I filled in for Mayor Given. I was told I'm almost as old as a dinosaur, but I can tell you that I don't run as good as a dinosaur. I was in the Dino Derby race of distinction or extinction, and there was a great turnout of people to watch a whole bunch of dinosaurs race like quarter horses, and I am not a quarter horse. I just want you to know that. I won't be doing it next year. Mr. Bressie is going to take the challenge. And one more thing I just wanted to bring up is the Dinosaur Museum. Speaking of dinosaurs, the night of the museum, the Philip J. Curry Dinosaur Museum will be having a fundraiser on September 28th, and I would encourage those on council to maybe make a date night for that night. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Councillor O'Toole. I wouldn't say you're a quarter horse by any means, but you're certainly a thoroughbred.
There you go.
Councillor Bressie.
A way to scoop my byline as I was getting the mic. Man, the abuse of the chair. I've got a couple highlights. One was this afternoon, Councillor Thiessen and I, along with Mayor Given, Councillors O'Toole, Councillor Minhas, went to a sod turning for the new Catholic high school site. And it's great to see the province promising to invest in our current and future kids. And because of that sod turning, I missed the ribbon cutting Councillor Platt was at, but Councillor Thiessen and I went to the luncheon signature supports held with a number of members of the recycling industry, and it was a fascinating conversation, learning about extended producer responsibility across Canada. It was interesting getting more information about how behind the times Alberta is. It was interesting learning about how national pricing that assumes EPR exists means that Alberta consumers pay more money for the products we buy. So it's another form of wealth distribution from Alberta to others, and that's something that's entirely within our province's control to fix. But something that also was cool was where EPRs come in across the country, it's always been substantially because of the results of municipal advocacy, which is something I didn't realize before, that it's always been municipalities leading the charge to something that's good for their jurisdictions and good for the environment and good for their citizens. And so it was cool to hear the power that municipalities elsewhere have. And I'm looking forward to debating some AUMA resolutions around extended producer responsibility. So that was fun. The other highlight / lowlight for me is we have the playground at Muskasippi Park finally open. And it is very much a highlight to have that for our community. It's very much a lowlight that I'm probably over 12 hours in standing in the sun at that playground as my kids play on it again and again and again. My kids cannot get enough of that playground, so it's fun to have that finally opened. An experience I had this weekend was I was playing the Swan City Showdown, the big disc golf tournament in town, and a bunch of families came in with their fathers or mothers who were competing, and I was talking to some of the families with young kids at the end of the tournament. I asked, so what did you do? They said, oh, we found this awesome park with a pool and a playground, and we can't believe you had that here. And I got to say, well, we didn't a week ago. We built it just for you guys. But it was really great to see how impressive this area is, not just to us who have been watching it build, but to people that haven't been there before. And I'm sure appreciating my kids having a new playground to play on, and I can't wait to enjoy that pool with other families, which I will be doing tomorrow as I take in Toonie Tuesday.
Thanks very much, Councillor Bessie, and thanks very much to all the council members who reported on a number of the different events that we all sort of attended in different configurations. I will report on a couple that I think haven't been mentioned. Appreciated the opportunity to meet with the Minister of Community and Social Services here at City Hall with other members of administration. Appreciate the Minister who is responsible for FCSS and persons with developmental disabilities, as well as a number of other things in our portfolio, was in our region and was interested in hearing from the City of Grande Prairie about some of the challenges that we face in our service in that area and some of the successes that we've had with FCSS funding and how vitally important it is in our community. Later that day, I had an opportunity to attend the Weyerhaeuser open house on their forestry management plan, their 10-year forestry management plan. I was really pleased to see them hosting that open house at the Eastlink Center. And in chatting with their staff, they said that that's a regular part of their public engagement now as they choose to take these kind of open houses to where people are. And they know that people are at Eastlink Center on a Tuesday night. And so it was great to see that facility being used in what we might think of as unexpected ways, but really is becoming a center of community. I also attended the Folk Fest, and it was great to see that the reports suggesting that it is the best selling Folk Fest in spite of the weather that we had. For those that were enjoyed it for the first time and are interested, I see that they have some super early bird tickets available right now that are actually 75% sold out. So if you want to book your 2020 summer plans, you can book an entire weekend, I think, for like $110, which is pretty great. I also had an opportunity to, I think I got invited for two reasons to an event. It was a 95th birthday. I don't get invited to all 95th birthdays, but I was very pleased to go to this one when I was invited. It was at one of the local churches, and it was for a local resident named Ruth Solberg. And I think the reason that I got invited was because I was one of Ruth's grade 3 students at Swanhaven School. But it was great to see so many Grande Prairie Public School District former students and teachers coming together to celebrate Ruth as she turns 95 years young. And I have to say that I found as I was signing the guest book, I was immediately self-conscious of my penmanship in a way that I haven't been for many, many years. And I think that that's probably because Ruth made such a lasting impression, but certainly I think speaks to the important impression that teachers have on young people. And that brings me to the sod turning for the new Catholic school. It was a good reminder that these facilities are not just pieces of infrastructure that cost dollars. They are a platform for experiences that people will carry with them for the rest of their lives. And it was a pleasure to be joined by other members of council there as we got to celebrate the sod turning of that event with the Minister of Infrastructure, who was in town for it. And in chatting with the minister and his staff, he was able to share that they're moving forward with tendering for the Grand Prairie Composite High School replacement. They expected that to be happening over the next couple of weeks into September, October. He said they have pre-qualified contractors. They had 12 originally. They're down to 5 that are pre-qualified. The contractors looking at the bid package suggested that the scale of the project was significant enough that they might need a bit of an extension to be able to put together the bids. But all in all, it was great to see 2 very positive indications that very important school projects in our region are going forward. I was very thankful and happy to see that, and thankful for the continued advocacy of all of our local MLAs on all of those issues. And with that, we're adjourned.